No problem. I'll be able to get to it in a few weeks. We're going to go into our Christmas series, and then I can hit it right after. And then we had to close again because of weather once again. And I'm like, man, I really am beginning to feel like there's somebody that doesn't want me to give this sermon. So I went before God, and I'm saying, is this you talking to me? Am I off base here? Is what I prepared not what you want to speak? And that's what, are you putting up obstacles? Is it just a coincidence? Is there something else at play? Is there somebody else who doesn't want me to give this sermon? And throughout all of that, my desire to preach what I'm about to preach never wavered once. And I believe that that is the leading of God. Now, whether it was spiritual warfare on the other side that kept this away, or whether it's coincidence, whether it was just God saying, no, not quite the right time, we're just going to put it right on this week for some reason, I don't know. All I know is that I'm excited to preach what I have to preach, because I feel that this is something that God is speaking, not just to me, because I know, little peek behind the curtain, most of the time when I go through the process of writing a sermon, God is preaching to me every bit as much as he uses me to preach to you. So it is something that I was deeply excited to learn about and study, and so I am hoping that you feel the same way. So, as I said, the holidays are a time where we can bring forward a lot of rest, a lot of relaxation, but also a lot of concerns and a lot of stresses. We get tied up a lot of times in the concerns of life. We get tied up in the stress and everything that comes along with life. And part of that is because whenever struggles and challenges come along, we always tend to default to, I've got so much more that I have to take care of. Because we live in a very self-sufficient world. Man has always been the type to want to handle problems ourselves. And I'm not just talking about man as in men, I'm talking about humankind. Our desire has always been, if there's a problem, we're going to fix it, and we're going to fix it on our own. We take pride in solving our own problems. We take pride in the skills that we have. We take pride in our intellect. We take pride in our wisdom. We truly believe that there's nothing that we cannot accomplish if we truly put our mind to it. And there's nothing wrong with the desire to take care of your own problems. But the truth of the matter is that there are absolutely things that are out of our reach. We grew up hearing, or at least I know one of the things that I grew up hearing, was that you could be anything you want if you just work hard enough. If you work at it, you can be anything. And we turn around and we tell the same thing to our kids. I've said that very thing to my own kids. You could be whatever you want to be if you want to work. I want them to dream big. I want them to shoot for the moon. And it sounds great, but the unfortunate truth is that there are going to be things that, despite your work ethic, despite your desire, are going to be just out of your reach through no fault of your own. If your hands are shaky, you're never going to be able to be a surgeon, no matter how much you study, no matter how well you know the human body, no matter how well you know medical science. If your hands shake, you can't be a surgeon because you just don't have the physical ability. I'm too old, fat, slow, and short to ever be an NFL wide receiver, no matter how much I might like to do that. There are things in my way that I just cannot get past. I'll give you another story. A friend of mine who I grew up with had this dream for as long as I knew him, to be a police officer just like his dad. All through middle school, high school, this was his first, second, third option. There was no plan B. He wanted to be a police officer just like his father. However, he discovered in high school that he was colorblind. And you cannot be a police officer if you are colorblind, he discovered. First of all, it was kind of weird to me. I'm like, how do you go all the way into high school not realizing that you're colorblind? But then I realized that, for them, that was just normal. That was just how they viewed the world. They don't realize they're colorblind until somebody tells them. But he realized he was colorblind, and he can't be a police officer if you're colorblind. So his dream was gone through no fault of his own, and no amount of work, desire was going to change that. The desire to shoot for the stars is good, but yet we also have to recognize that there are things in our life that no matter how hard we try, we just might not be able to do. Honestly, this lesson of there might just be certain things that are out of your reach, no matter how hard you try, but yet you should still dream big, is taught really well by the Disney movie Ratatouille. I don't know if who's seen that. Now stick with me. I know it's a movie about a rat, but stick with me. So the statement is made in the movie by the chef Gusteau that anyone can cook. And that sounds a lot like the statement that I made earlier about how you dream big, you can do anything you want. And he says, well, anyone can cook. And then there's a food critic who kind of acts as the villain of the movie. And he took exception to this. And he says that no, not just anybody can cook. But then he said that he understood the full meaning of it when he discovered that a rat had cooked a delicious meal. It's not that any random person, if they just worked hard enough, could have this skill, but that the skill could come from anywhere and from anyone. Yet the person that the rat was using to cook couldn't cook no matter how hard he tried. Now, the mentality of I can do absolutely anything I put my mind to if I just try hard enough can lead to disappointment in our physical lives when our limitations are made clear to us. But they become so much more damaging if we apply that same mentality to our spiritual life. That if I work hard enough, I'll be able to accomplish whatever I want. There are two areas in our lives that people, even in the church, will seem to think that they can do on their own and have no real need to rely on God. And this is in the area of wisdom and righteousness. We think that we can become truly wise in ourselves, or we may think that we already are. This leads to many dangerous and absolutely evil outcomes. We think that we can become righteous or good on our own, and this leads us into great danger. We'll talk about wisdom first, and then we'll go to righteousness. See, man has fancied himself to be wise for thousands of years, all the way back to the very beginning. And in some ways, I would say that that's absolutely a true and fair statement, especially if we're going to compare ourselves to the animals that we share the world with. I would like to think that I'm wiser than a dog or a cat. However, when we begin to consider ourselves to be truly wise, wonderfully wise, and that we can fix all the problems in our lives and in the world, we will quickly find that the wisdom of men has its limits. Not only is the wisdom of men limited, but it can also lead to some pretty horrific results. When we seek wisdom on our own terms and push the wisdom of God aside and think that we can accomplish things in our own mind, that we can come up with the solution to our problems all on our own, we are allowing for flawed wisdom to take control. And we can all see the atrocities in the world today and throughout history, and those are all the result of flawed human wisdom. When we push aside godly wisdom, we are actually making the same mistake that Adam and Eve made in the garden. The fall of man is tied to pride, absolutely, but also from desire. But a desire for what? A desire to be like God. And to be like God in what area? See, they were already made in the image of God. They were co-regents with God over all creation, meaning they had control over everything. Adam got to name all of the animals. So what was it that they desired? What more could they possibly want? Well, we find the answer in Genesis 3:6. This is after the serpent had come and laid out the temptation to Eve, that she would be like God if she ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Eve decides to do it. And this verse tells us exactly what it was that she desired. In Genesis 3:6, it says, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate." What was it desirable for? She wanted wisdom. It was desirable to make one wise. Not just wisdom not just wisdom like any kind of mundane wisdom that they already had, because they already had wisdom within them. They were higher than the animals. But they wanted the wisdom of God. Because the serpent told them, you're going to be like God. You're going to be wise like God if you eat of this fruit. But she wanted to get that wisdom. Of course she would want that wisdom. Who wouldn't want to be wise like God is wise? But she wanted to get that wisdom without God. Remember that Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. They walked with him face to face. They talked with him. Had Eve desired the wisdom of God and she had gone about it in a way seeking it through God, she could have gone to God directly and asked him for wisdom. And he likely would have shared that wisdom with her. But she didn't do that. She didn't seek wisdom through God. She wanted God-like wisdom, but she wanted it on her own. And it led to the downfall of mankind. See, when we attempt to be wise without God, we open ourselves up to the same kind of tragic fall that we saw in the garden, just on a smaller scale. Why is man's wisdom so dangerous? And why is God's better? Well, let's look at what the Bible teaches us about both and why it is better for us to rely on the wisdom of God rather on the wisdom that we can find on our own. The first point that I want to tell you is that man's wisdom leads to a flawed perspective, but God's perspective is perfect. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me here. I am not trying to make the claim that man's wisdom is completely useless. It's not useless. It is, however, limited, and that limitation is one of perspective. We can only view a circumstance from our own perspective. We can only see things through our own eyes. We could try to put ourselves into the shoes of another, but we can never truly see something from any perspective other than our own. This limitation does not apply to God. He stands above and outside this universe, and as such can see all and know all. It is therefore good for us to seek wisdom of others. We can increase our wisdom by seeking the wisdom of others, but we should never discount the need to seek wisdom from the ultimate source of wisdom, and that is God. We find this truth in Proverbs 12:15. We are told here that if we stand alone in our own perspective without any other, we will undoubtedly consider ourselves to be wise, but in truth we have become very foolish. Proverbs 12:15 says, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise." See, again, when we retreat within ourselves, when we try to become wise by ourselves, we think ourselves truly wise. We think that we can solve all of our problems. We think that we are great and wise and knowledgeable, but in truth, we are isolating ourselves and we are making ourselves fools because we are restricting ourselves to a single perspective, our own. But we can increase our wisdom by seeking it from others. That much is clear. However, the more we learn from outside sources, the more we begin to realize we don't know. We have our own flawed perspective, and we try to fix that flaw by seeking, a lot of times, more flawed perspectives. We learn from teachers. We learn from people in our lives, and we try to piece together a greater wisdom than we could come to on our own if we actually realize that we need to seek wisdom from outside of ourselves. Now, this is better than nothing, but it is still incomplete. And the wisdom of men will always be incomplete if you are seeking to become truly wise. See, many broken pieces of man's wisdom are better than one, are better than yours alone, but it is better than that. It is better than all of that to seek and trust in the unbroken wisdom of God. To do this requires the opposite of the mentality of Adam and Eve in the garden. They arrogantly sought wisdom outside of God. And to counteract that, we need to gain true wisdom from God. And we see that in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Instead of having this attitude of arrogance of, I'm going to find wisdom on my own, we need to instead turn our eyes to God and humble ourselves and still seek wisdom, but not from ourselves and not from other worldly sources, but instead we need to go to the one true source of wisdom. In Proverbs 3, beginning in verse 5, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." Now, this is a verse I'm sure you have all heard before if you've been in the church for any length of time. It's a very common verse to hear. But do you recognize what this verse is actually telling you to do? Let's break it down. We got to trust in the Lord with all your heart. Okay, good. I got that. We should all be doing that, and I don't think that that's something super controversial. That's something that we can all kind of absorb and say, yeah, we need to trust God. That's a central part of our faith. Lean not on your own understanding. Okay, so you mean I have to admit that I very well could be wrong and need to trust somebody else to tell me what I should do. All right, that's a little bit harder to take. That's a bit of a tough pill to swallow, to acknowledge, you know what? Even though I think myself wise, I can be wrong. I need to recognize that truth. Okay, I think I could do that. You know, I can acknowledge that maybe I could be wrong and that I should. Okay, I could do that. Acknowledge him in all your ways. Now, have you really thought about what that means? What that means is to show humility. It means to say, in all my ways, I'm going to acknowledge you, God. That's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to access that level of humility. We're pretty proud creatures, and we like to think that we're smarter and more capable than we truly are. But to acknowledge God means to acknowledge that he is going to know better than we a lot of times. But I guess I can do that. I guess I can recognize that, maybe God's going to have things figured out. But then it's the last part where I think a lot of people will say the words, but they don't realize what they're saying. He shall direct my paths. Have you ever considered what it actually means to have God direct your paths? See, I've often thought of God directing my path like learning to ride a bike. You know how every kid will go through a time of learning to ride your bike, especially when you take the training wheels off, and your dad's usually going behind you, keeping you steady, but you're in control of the bike, but dad's just sitting there holding you steady. And a lot of times we like to think that that's what God's going to do in directing our paths, that we're sitting there on our bike, we're living our lives, but God's coming along behind us and making sure we don't fall over. He's keeping us up. See, that's a nice thought, and I do think that God does protect us from many things, but that's not what's being said here. God directing our paths doesn't mean that he's coming along behind us and making sure we don't fall over as we go the direction we want to go. Instead, think of it as coming to a fork in the road, and your wisdom, your desire says, I need to go left. But God is telling you to go right. Now, if you really have God directing your path, that means you go right, even though it is not what you wanted, even though it's not what your wisdom says that you should do. God directing your paths means that you're not the one steering the bike, and he's not just holding you steady from behind. God directing your paths means he's telling you which way to turn the bike, and you listen to him. You following the wisdom of God, you allowing God to direct your path, is not determined in the moments when your wisdom and God's wisdom align. Because then you could just as easily be following your own desires. You allowing God to direct your path is determined in the moments when his wisdom and your wisdom are not aligned. When you want to go left, but God says go right. If God's directing your path, you're going to listen to him. If he's not, you're going to go the way that you're going to go, and you're just going to expect God to come along for the ride. If we want to follow God's wisdom, we have to know what it is. We have to seek it through study of his word. But more importantly, we have to have a reverence for his word. This is what's being talked about in Proverbs 9:10. It says that if we want wisdom, if we want knowledge, if we want understanding, this tells us where we need to look for it and what we have to do to get it. In Proverbs 9:10, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. When this verse says fear, when it says the fear of the Lord, it is talking about a respectful reverence for God, for who He is. To know in our hearts that He is higher than we are. That reverence is what's going to allow you to put God in the driver's seat and say, you get to direct my paths. I'm going to follow your wisdom instead of mine. And we can gain knowledge and understanding through the Word, and that is good. But without the wisdom that comes from the fear of God, that understanding is not going to help us. See, knowledge is having information, and wisdom is knowing what to do with it. If you want to not only know what the Scriptures say, but actually apply it to your life, you have to have a respectful and reverent fear of God. That is what it means to be really wise, to trust God completely because you know who He is. Not only do you know who He is, but you actually respect who He is. See, a lot of times we think we can just read the Bible as though it is just a book or just a collection of stories, and we think that's going to be the key to righteousness and that's going to be the key to wisdom. There is true wisdom in the Bible. There is true knowledge in the Bible. But if you read it and then you don't apply it, you are not wise. You have just grown in understanding. And understanding without wisdom is not valuable. You need wisdom, and that comes from a recognition and a reverence for who God is in your life. The second point that I want to say is that man's wisdom creates disorder and evil, but God's wisdom brings peace and righteousness. Now, what I mean by that is I think that most men do not set out to do evil on purpose. By that I mean when most people commit what we would call evil, either do not believe that it is evil, or they believe that it is in some way justified. There are obviously those who do commit evil for evil's sake. There are broken people out there. But I think that if you know that you are doing evil and you revel in it, those kinds of people, they're kind of few and far between. I would say that most evil acts that are committed by men are born out of a flawed worldly wisdom. They think they're justified or they think they're right. When we have that limited perspective, we begin to view what is wise as simply what is beneficial to me or those around me. And this can lead to the exploitation of others. Once we get to that place of what's wise is what is beneficial, it becomes very, very easy to victimize others for the, quote, greater good. Even Hitler thought the Holocaust was justified because it would lead to a stronger Germany. This is a result of flawed human wisdom. We are told this in James 3, verses 13 through 16. Human wisdom tells you to seek what is best for you, while true godly wisdom will seek what is best, period. Not best for you, but what is best. When we walk only in human wisdom, we may seek what is good, but oftentimes all we find is what is evil. In James 3, beginning in verse 13, it says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there." Now see, this doesn't paint a really positive picture of human wisdom. It says human wisdom is confusion. It's every evil thing because human wisdom is born out of self-seeking. And the wisdom of men has led to the atrocities that we have seen from dictators the world over and throughout history. They were following their own wisdom. And what is true on a grand scale is also true on a small scale. If you follow the wisdom of men in your life, you will find the same disorder. You will find the same evil. But if we truly desire a good, wise, and moral society, we have to rely on the wisdom that God has given to man, not on the wisdom that man has discovered for themselves. Just one verse later from what we read in James 3:17, we are told this. The list of this that comes from God's wisdom are all things that we desire and hope for, but we don't know how to get there. We keep trying to achieve the good ends that come from the wisdom of God, but we're seeking them through the pathways of the wisdom of man, and we just can't seem to get there, and you wonder why. It's because you're seeking wisdom from the wrong source. In James 3:17, it says, "But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy." Now, we can all read that list of traits and we say, that's good, that's desirable. I want that thing. I want peace. I want gentleness. I want full of mercy. I want good fruits. I want no partiality. I don't like hypocrisy. Those are all good things, and most of the wisdom of man says we're seeking these things, but we never seem to find them. Yet this is what God promises if we put aside the wisdom of man and seek after his wisdom instead. There are many that would say, and I've heard this argument often, that we don't need God to tell us to be good people. We can just be good on our own. That's what human wisdom will tell you. Or they may even say, and I've heard this said, this has actually been said to me, that if you need God to tell you not to murder somebody, something as basic as that, then you are a monster, talking to me. It says if you need a God to tell you that you shouldn't murder someone, that makes you a terrible person. I wholeheartedly disagree with this argument. We do need God to tell us not to be evil, because we can't help the evil thoughts and desires that come up in our heart. We do need a God to tell us something as basic as don't murder people. There's a reason why God had to tell us that in the 10 Commandments, because we couldn't figure that out on our own. That is how flawed human wisdom is. Now, oftentimes people who try to make this argument might point to their own life and say, well, I don't have God, and I'm a good person. I follow the same moral code that you do. Maybe so. But that moral code comes from a culture that was built on what? They live in this country, and they live in this country that is a culture that was built on Christian morality, the wisdom of God. And as that wisdom has been eroded over the last several years, and Christianity is being more and more pushed to the side in our culture, and the wisdom of men has taken the front seat, we've seen wickedness and evil increase, not decrease. What was it, let me ask you, that caused the West to abolish the evil of slavery? It was Christian morality and wisdom. What was it that motivated the Founding Fathers to create the freest and most equal society the world has ever seen? It was Christian morality and wisdom. The non-Christian world still has not done these things. You look at the places of the world where they don't have the influence of God, and they still haven't accomplished this thing. It might shock you to hear that there are more slaves in the world now than at any point in history. We just don't think about it because we don't see it, because we live in a society that was built on the wisdom of God, and we've abolished that evil. But the rest of the world that doesn't have that, they haven't even figured that part out, that it's wrong to own people. If we discard the wisdom of God, we will begin to undo all the good that the wisdom of God has done in this world. That is the danger. Man's wisdom leads to disorder, leads to chaos, leads to subjugation, leads to evil, whereas God's wisdom leads to good and righteousness. Third point I want to make on wisdom is that man's wisdom results in spiritual foolishness. As we grow in earthly wisdom apart from God, we begin to focus exclusively on the material things of this world, and the spiritual things begin to get neglected. Is it any wonder that people are more unhappy and purposeless now than when following God was the norm? The wisdom of God tells you that you have a purpose, and the wisdom of men tells you that there is none. This leads us to be at odds with God, because the wisdom of men is at odds with the wisdom of God. And as we are told in 1 Corinthians 1, verses 20 through 25, The reason that these things are at odds is because the wisdom of God seems foolish to men. So in order to follow God, we are going to have to be willing to do things that might not make sense to the rest of the world, or be willing to do things that might not even make sense to us in the moment. That's the secret, is that sometimes God's going to tell you to do things that you're going to look at and say, I don't get why I should do that. There were times like that in my life. Apart from God, who else thinks that it'd be crazy to uproot your life and go from one end of the country to the middle of the country? That's what my family did. We uprooted ourselves from California to move out to the middle of nowhere, Iowa. That doesn't make sense outside of God. There were people who told me I was crazy to come out here. But you know what? It was the wisdom of God that was telling me to come here. And my family has flourished in ways that it never would have had we stayed. But that is the wisdom of God at work. And sometimes you have to be willing to accept that the wisdom of God is going to look like foolishness to the world. And sometimes the wisdom of God might even look like foolishness to you. And you have to be willing to trust in a God who knows what is best for you. In 1 Corinthians 1, beginning in verse 20, it says, "Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." This verse tells us that the Jews were seeking a sign of great power, and God showed his power through death, through the death of his son on the cross. That doesn't make sense to us. How can you show power in death? The Greeks were philosophers. They prided themselves on their great wisdom. They sought to unravel the mysteries of the universe. And yet God showed victory through defeat. And in that victory, he solved the problem of the sinfulness of man that we never could. Now see, the ingenuity of man is incredible, and it has given us great advancements. Industrial might, nuclear power, even AI that's coming onto the scene now. But it takes a godly people to know how to best use these things. See, man's wisdom will often tell you what you can do, what is possible. But God's wisdom will tell you what you should do. The best thing about the wisdom of God is found in James 1:5. Now see, this wisdom that puts to shame the wisdom of men may seem so unattainable, because I've gone to great lengths to show that we can't get there on our own. The wisest among us who seeks wisdom apart from God can't even scratch the surface of the wisdom of God. We can't get there on our own. So this wisdom might seem so unattainable. We might not be able to get there on our own, but the good news is I know a guy who can get you there. Fortunately enough, he is generous when it comes to these things. In James 1:5, it says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." Think about how powerful that is. I've gone to great lengths to talk about the limitations of the wisdom of men and the greatness of the wisdom of God. And this verse is telling us right here, all you have to do is go to God and ask for it, and he will give it to you freely. Seek the wisdom of God, because that leads to where we all want to be, and the only way to get there is through him. Don't make the same mistake that Adam and Eve made in the garden. Seek wisdom from God, not on your own, not in yourself. As I said earlier, man's wisdom leads to spiritual foolishness. And when that happens, the righteousness that we are meant to receive from God becomes threatened. I talked about the evils that are inherent in men, but there is also something in us that yearns for righteousness, that image of God that's within us, that seeks after righteousness, to be good and not wicked. We may not be able to help ourselves a lot of times. We are wicked due to our sinful nature, but there's a desire within each of us to be good and righteous. Due to this, not only will that many seek to become wise on their own, but they also seek to become righteous on their own. Now, this can happen, I want to be clear, in both a secular and a religious context. In secularism, it all boils down to don't do anything that I don't like and do the things that I like. This kind of righteousness is doomed from the beginning because no two people are going to ever agree on everything that we like and don't like. Even the standard of what's good for you is good for you as long as you aren't affecting anyone else falls short because we live in a society and can't help but impact the lives of those around us. So there have to be standards to become righteous. You can't just be righteous if you're doing the things that you want to do. This is a problem that secular morality just can't solve because there's no ultimate authority to appeal to. There's no ultimate standard of morality to appeal to. Now, you would think that the religious would be all set in this area because we do have an ultimate authority. But this is not always the case, though. Because oftentimes we take the standards of the ultimate authority and seek to complete them in our own strength and ability. And that becomes what we call self-righteousness. And this is so dangerous because those who are self-righteous believe that they are justified not by themselves, but they believe that they are justified by God through their own good works. They know that He exists. They know that that objective moral lawgiver exists, and He's on their side. That's what the self-righteous will say. God exists and He's on my side. Hopefully you've spotted the flaw in that statement, and we're going to get there in a minute. Nowhere is this self-righteousness better shown in the Bible than with the Pharisees. They fully believed themselves to be men of God, and yet their hearts had drifted from Him because it became all about the rules and how well they could keep them, and not about God. This is why Jesus rebukes them in Matthew 15, 8 through 9. In fact, He rebukes them harshly. This is following the Pharisees getting all bent out of shape because Jesus' disciples were not following their traditions that they thought they had to follow to be righteous. And Jesus, again, He rebukes them. It's actually interesting to see that there are many wicked people that Jesus came across in His life, and He treated them well and He treated them kindly. But who did He have harsh words for? Self-righteous, overly religious Pharisees. In Matthew 15, beginning in verse 8, He's speaking about the Pharisees, and He says, "These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." He's talking about how these Pharisees were good at saying all the right things and appearing to be righteous, but they were not near to God's heart. When I said that statement earlier, that they know God exists and that He's on their side, and I said there's a flaw in that statement. And I wonder if you caught it. Because see, the self-righteous believe that God is on their side, but the ones who have true righteousness from God know that it's not about God being on your side. It's about you being on God's side. We need God to be on our side. That implies that God can be changed and God can be coerced. God has a standard. God is who He is. It is up to us to align ourselves with God, not to try to get God to align with us. The danger of this is found in Matthew 7, verses 21 and 23. Because if your righteousness is found in how well you can follow the standards, even the standards of God, then you are setting yourself up for eternal consequences because you're putting your faith into the righteousness that you can create with your own hands. In Matthew 7, beginning in verse 21, it says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. The reason these people that Jesus is talking about listed all the things that they did is because on some level they believed that they were saving themselves through their adherence to the law. That they were able to do all the right things, but yet their hearts again were far from God, just like the Pharisees. They thought that their righteous acts could save them. Righteous acts are a natural outgrowth of your relationship with God, and that saves you, not the actions themselves. Ephesians 2, verses 8 through 9 puts this beautifully. It says, For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. The self-righteous want to point to all the things that they have done. But those who have found real righteousness, we know to point to Jesus. In James 2:10, we are told that if we want to try to earn our righteousness, then the full burden of that righteousness is going to fall on our heads. If we think that we can earn it on our own, God says, feel free to try, but the standard is heavy. If you want a grace, you have to accept that it cannot be earned. If we want to try to earn it, then there is no grace. In James 2:10, it says, For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. What is he saying there? If you're going to set out and you're going to say, I'm going to keep the law, I'm going to become righteous in my own ability, you better be willing to be perfect. You better be able to be perfect, because if you stumble at one point, you're guilty of breaking the whole law. See, I understand the desire to handle all of these things on your own. It's very normal to us. It's wired into us. Yet, as I told you in the beginning, there are things that despite our best efforts, we just cannot do. If you want true wisdom, you need to seek out the source of all wisdom. And if you want righteousness, you need to seek out the source of righteousness. And the source of both is God. The good news is that both of these things are simple to get. We just need to ask. The difficult part is you need to ask. And that asking requires humility. It requires us setting our pride aside and saying, I can't become wise on my own. I need your wisdom, God. Saying, I can't become righteous on my own, God. I need your help. If you want the wisdom that God offers, I want to take time to pray with you today and ask for that wisdom, since that's what we are told to do in the book of James. And if you want the righteousness that God offers, I want nothing more than to pray with you, because that is salvation. That is freedom from sin. Whether you have never sought Jesus before or you have been trying to do it on your own and you want to get back to being saved by grace and put it back on God and say, I've been trying to do it on my own and I'm tired and I'm ready to put that down. See, the folly of man is thinking that we can do either of these things on our own, thinking that we can become wise on our own, or thinking that we can become righteous on our own. But the wisdom and righteousness of God is that we don't have to. We don't have to become wise on our own. We don't have to become righteous on our own. He has done both of those things for us. He will give us wisdom if we ask for it and we seek it. He will give us righteousness if we come to him and humble ourselves and ask for it. That is what separates us from everything else. See, every other religion in the world is going to tell you that there's something that you have to do. There's something that you have to achieve. You have to earn your righteousness, or you have to earn this or that. God tells you that you don't. He says, I've already earned it for you, and I'm willing to give it to you. All you have to do is humble yourself and ask. So if either of those areas, I'm going to pray over the service, but if in either of those areas you want prayer to seek wisdom from God, or you want the righteousness that God offers, you want the salvation that God offers, I want you to come forward and see, and I'll pray with each and every one of you if that's what you want. But let us think today that it's not about me, it's not about how wise I can become, it's not about how well I can follow rules. It is about him. It is about who he is, and it is about seeking to draw nearer to him through prayer, through reading your word, through everything else. Seek relationship with God, because that relationship with God is where you are going to find true wisdom, and it is where you are going to find righteousness. And those wisdom and righteousness that come from God is so much greater than the wisdom or righteousness that you might be able to forge for yourselves. You can try if you want, but the wisdom of man leads to foolishness, and the righteousness of man leads to wickedness. But the wisdom of God is true wisdom, and the righteousness of God is soul-saving. So I would encourage you to lay aside your own pride and to come with humility to God and seek these things from him. Let's pray. Oh, Jesus, you are so wonderful that you would come to this earth, live and die for us, so that we may be given righteousness that we didn't earn, that you earned on our behalf. If all we would do is lay our pride down, seek after you, and seek your righteousness that you give so freely. And Lord, may we, even though we may think ourselves to be wise, you are the source of all true wisdom. So Lord, I pray that your people would humble themselves today and seek the wisdom and righteousness that you offer. That your people would become truly wise, not because there's something special about us, not because we are so smart, but because we have learned to trust in you who is truly wise. That we, your people, may become righteous, not because we are so good at following your rules, but because we have put our hope in you completely. Lord, that you may become our righteousness, that you may become our wisdom, that you may become that guiding light in our life. Lord, may we be your people who seek after you with everything that we have, lay aside our pride, and put on the humility of one who knows that everything that we have is a gift from you. So, Lord, I pray that your people would be a humble people full of wisdom and full of righteousness that comes from you. I ask this in your mighty and precious name. Amen. I love you guys. Have a great week. And like I said, seek the wisdom of God. Seek the righteousness of God. And if you want prayer in that area, I am here for you. And if not,